Hello there, potential clay addicts. It's me, Melanie from Mudgirl Pottery and Mud Clay Studio here in Madison, New Jersey. This next video, I did a little backwards. I did the actual video of making the pot before I told you about it because I want to make sure I can actually pull it off. So here you go. This is my 14-pound giant gravity-defying Japanese style bowl. And here's how I made it. Okay, so centering a 14-pound ball of clay. It turns out I start a little slower when it comes to centering a larger piece of clay. I just want to kind of smooth out those ends, those edges, get a little more controlled. Although, truth be told, I've never centered 14 pounds of clay. So, let's see how this goes. If I use all the principles that I teach my students, it should work. The first thing I did wrong was I didn't quite wait until it was in the middle. So we've got this sort of thing going on here. We'll see. Wish me luck. Start up at the top because it's less clay. And as it starts going lower, I'll try and control the bottom a little bit more. So if I was only dealing with 5 pounds of clay, that would be done. My bat's ticking a little. One of the things you'll know about bats is that bats have one hole bigger than the other. And I learned recently that's so that you can actually get it off of the wheel. I always complained about it, but now I know why. So what I'll actually do sometimes is I'll find a little dry clay on the floor. I think I'm a little messy here. And I will take very, very dry clay, like bone dry, and I'll shove it in the hole. And why bone dry? Well, it's not wet and gooey yet, so it'll hold its position for a little longer than the wet clay. The wet clay is automatically soft, so it's not going to do much for too long, but the dry clay, it's going to be a while before it gets wet. So use the back of our wood tool to push that in. Let's start again. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, a little less ticking. So a lot of you guys know I don't like to wedge clay. So I took this right out of the bag. I slap wedged it together, and we're just gonna hope for the best. Bad practice, I know. Many people would probably suggest I cone this up a few times, but I finally got some control over it, so I'm gonna see what happens. All right, let's go for it. So now we're gonna open up. Wheel going about 75% of the speed. I'm gonna have a little bit more control, but enough speed so that I can drive my hands through. Interesting, I feel it up in my tricep there, which is some interesting feeling for throwing a pot. Now I want this to have a pretty good foot. So I think it's all relative. You know, a larger pot, your walls can't be as thin and your foot can't be that small. That might be a bit too much clay, but not really what you would think. Go ahead and check it again. Yeah, so I'm looking about an inch. I'm good with that. Now, obviously, I'm gonna need a decent amount of strength to get this clay all the way here with a little bit of speed. I'm gonna pull with more my middle finger, but my other fingers are pushing the sides of the clay with it, and my whole hand. And I'm leaning it up against my outside hand because I don't want the clay to kind of go wherever it wants. So I'm always have clay between two hands or two fingers, even when I'm dealing with this larger piece of clay. If you throw it off just a little bit, you can kind of use your entire hand. So larger clay, you're definitely dealing with more than some fingers. Get the water out of the inside. Compress this. I don't want to have to deal with this little lip right here. Again, I want to show you how I opened it up. I want to be a little conscious of this little lip here. I'm going to try and fix that. It's pretty much still centered, which is good. Look, I'm using my entire hand. Okay, so now that I have it opened, I'm going to start to pull my walls. Now, normally with the smaller piece of clay, I would have opened up and used my first pull would be part of my open. What I am going to do is I am going to use my whole hand to sort of make a pull here, right here at 6 o'clock. This is totally different than what I do with smaller clay. But I just wanted to try and get a little bit of control here and fix that bottom part. Now, with larger clay, a lot of people will go ahead and use a knuckle. I'm not completely comfortable with that, maybe another video. So I use a sponge. My fingers would create too much of an uneven pull. And when I was doing these yesterday, I noticed that you always know when you have doomed your pot. It's a slip of a finger, it's maybe your hands weren't parallel to each other, maybe you got a little dry, you got yourself a little thin spot. With your fingers, you tend to have uneven pressure, so I tend to use a sponge. Now I am really using my entire strength of my hand and my arm to scoop this up. Now if I'm doing this large sort of gravity defying style bowl, I really need to remember to leave a decent width on the bottom of my clay. Because no matter how thin your walls are, it's still 10 pounds of clay, 9 pounds of clay. So when it goes out parallel to the wheel head, it's very likely to flop. So we want to give it a little bit of a support system. And remember, we always keep our lip double thick. Remember, if we want this lip to come all the way out here, if it's a quarter of an inch up here, and when you stretch it out here, it's going to be non-existent. I'm starting to insinuate bowl, but not quite yet. A big problem a lot of people have is that the top quarter of their pot is always thinner than the bottom part of their pot. So I want you to know what I just did. I actually just stopped the camera so that I can make sure that the whole pot was in the frame. But one of the problems with stopping in between pulls is that your arms don't remember how strong and how stable they were. So you always want to be careful when you stop and then start again. You may not remember, your body doesn't remember what it was doing with the last pull. Remember, your hands aren't able to be touching each other. So I'm not being as aggressive with this pull as I would be if I had just continuously thrown. So clay also has its limitations. If this was porcelain, I can go a lot thinner. But with stoneware, you know, you just, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little scared. My fear is stopping me from going much thinner. So here's what we look like from the top so far. It kind of can just be sort of a giant bowl if we wanted it to be. But again, I want to try and get the walls a little more horizontal, a little more parallel to the table or the wheels. So I'm going to go ahead and heat this up a little with the heat gun so that it gives me a little bit more stability. In the beginning, I talked about having some weak spots that when you're throwing your pot, you know when you kind of might have messed it up for the life of the pot. And you may see that my shape changes a little here. That happens to me very often, so it's something I really want to examine when I start to throw, of why this top part here. I don't know if my hands get dry and I get a little stuck, or maybe my arms get tired. So maybe I should stop a little lower, grab some water and see what happens. But we're going to be mindful of that spot throughout the entire pot, the rest of the pot. I want to thin out the bottom a little bit more. So again, I said, the top of your pot is usually thinner than your pot, but when you're making a bowl like this, the problem with that is that you're going to thin out your top even more by stretching it out. So kind of defeats the purpose. All right, let's get that heat gun. Now when you're using a heat gun, you want to be very mindful that your wheel is moving at a nice speed and that you don't hit one spot too long. So again, this is not something you can do while you're having a conversation with anybody. If you hit one spot too long, you're going to dry it out in that one spot. It's almost as bad as when you're pulling and you create a thin spot. I try and get about 2 rotations per hit with the heat gun. 1, 2, and then I go up a little more. 1, 2. I'm just looking for something to be a little tackier, a little bit more. You want to watch that cord also when you're heat gunning anything. Keep in mind that the thicker parts may crack, which are kind of like the mud cracks in the desert. Extreme heat on very moist, thick clay. So I'm going to be a little more mindful. You also want to be mindful in the thin spots too. So don't think about anything else while you're throwing a pot. Just kind of getting rid of the moisture. Always put your heat gun facing up. Up. There's a stand here. You may not realize that, but if you put it up, this is still super hot. So you want to make sure you don't bang into it, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it doesn't lean on your cord. We know this from experience here. It will melt that cord. All right, so I am going to use one of 2 different tools here. I've got a giant mud, I think it's a Dirty Girls, Mud Tools rib here that I really like. What I like about it is the hole here and the size of it. The size of it gives me a little more confidence. I'm not doing too much. And then I've also got this giant one here. Once I clean it, I'll know what company it is. But what's good about this one, it's got 2 holes. No idea what brand it is. Oh, and you also want to be mindful of leaning into your pot. So again, be careful. Okay. Remember, you could always fix your pot while the wheel is moving. Just dampen your hands a little. All right, so you have one of 2 choices. I think I'm going to do the outside first, so I can leave this on the outside of my pot. Take my sponge and push it up against the wall. We're just going to do a little dry run here. Decide that that's the bottom of my pot where I'm digging in. And I'm going to push it up against the rib with a wet sponge, or damp sponge actually. So you see the end goal is to have that lip on the top here touching that tool and keeping your rib hand super still. And then you don't want to forget about the top. I always say that when you come off of your pot, you want to treat it like you're putting that last card or any card on a house of cards. You want to wait until it's completely still and then slowly take your hands off. Okay, let's go ahead and do that again. We're going to try and go to a little bit more of an angle. Put your fingers in the hole. It helps. So that's why it's there. Otherwise your hands are going to slip. Not to hang it up on anything. Now I'm going a little bit more of an angle. Again, house of cards, I actually will bring the rib up a little and slowly take it off of the pot. Again, when you're getting water, be careful and mindful of the edge there. All right. Now, as I said, very often when you throw your pot, your bottom part may be thicker than your upper part. So you'll get what's called sort of the beginner bump. I'm gonna go ahead and show that to you. I'm not sure if you guys can see, but right around here, we've got sort of what we call the beginner bump. And it's where the clay starts to get a little thicker and also is being supported by the clay underneath. This can tend to be sort of a visual problem. As many of you guys know, I'll probably just hashtag carve the shit out of it to hide that, or we can take a little bit off on the inside with a metal rib. So it's really up to you if you mind it. Maybe you want to include it in your design, who knows, but we're going to try and fix it now. But you guys can see what I'm looking at from the top. So again, we're going to see if I can fix that inside just a little bit using this handy metal rib here. So I always want to support the bottom. Maybe I just want to cheat a little and carve a little bit off on there inside. I'm going to hide the evidence with our fingers. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and see if we can stretch this a bit more. Maybe this time we start and we do the rib on the outside. On the inside, sorry. So this time I'm actually going to use the curl. And although I don't want it curled with this tool, I don't want it rounded, sorry, not the curl, the rounded part. I still want to do a little bit at a time. So the rounded part allows me to only work on an inch at a time. It helps me sort of really get that smooth transition on the inside. Let's go ahead and go a little bit more of an angle. Again, wet tools. Hold on to it with the hole. And I'm going to go to a little bit more of an angle. Push it up against that rib. Seems pretty extreme what I'm doing right now, so we're going to maybe change our minds about how far we're going to go. All right. Now, although I feel as though I'm probably done with what I'm doing with this pot, I am a little nervous that, again, this might be thin up here, but it's still a decent amount of clay. So it can weigh down and flop a little. So I'm gonna go ahead and just speed up the settling of it a little and use the heat gun again. So I am gonna go back in, this time with a bit of a smaller rib. And the same way when I trim or do anything, I'll use a smaller tool to pay attention to a smaller part. That's what I'm gonna do this time. And I'm gonna really try and straighten out this sort of right angle that I have going on. This curl, rounded edge that I have here. I'm just gonna pick a spot right around here, and I'm just gonna push my lip up against that tool. A little micro throwing. I just want to maybe straighten this out too, while going up. Now I decide what I want with my lip. So here's a decision. Do I want my lip to go that way, or do I want it to be parallel to the wheel? So that's a decision that really kind of got to make now. So maybe I'm going to try and go parallel. So I'm going to kind of take a little bit off of my lip there. Now, I'll show you guys in a second what I did with the lip. Not sure if you can see it from there. You can smooth out a lot of these little cacas later on. So right now, playing around too much. So what do I have to do, everybody? Say it loud with me. Call it a pot.